So this was kind of rocked my world a few years ago, because we've always thought that ketamine was a synthetic, right? We thought we discovered it. We thought it was totally synthetic, that it was man-made. Well, it's not. We actually found it on mushrooms in 2020, this really obscure like Parasites and Vectors journal, which studies like cattle. They came out and are like, oh, surprise, we found this on mushrooms. And the cattle eat it, and it's anti-parasitical, and it does serve a purpose in nature. So it is something that does grow on mushrooms in nature. So we just discovered it. We discovered it naturally a little after we had discovered it synthetically.
Which is kind of the opposite of how we discover things. That is wild.
Yeah. How you doing, Nicole?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. So
I brought some drinks if you want to pick one. They're like mushrooms. They're lion's mane and cordyceps.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Will you keep it closer?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Like, God.
Yeah, it was. I mean, even that, when I got finished, I mean, it was a packed house.
Yeah, we have been busy. I think we've figured out a lot of like the process piece, right? How to get people to feel comfortable, how to feel like they're really supported during their journey. And then we got some more staff, which really just helped a lot.
How many staff do you have right now?
So we have 12 people involved with the clinic. We have several CRNAs. I think we have 4 or 5 CRNAs that work part-time. We have 4 or 5 nurses, an FNP, and then we have 2 mental health providers in addition to myself. So we have a psychologist and a life coach.
What?
Yeah.
Whoa, I had no idea there were so many people.
It's usually me that's there, right? I'm there the most. But we do have a lot of people that like fill in and like to come in for a day or two. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, we're so excited about this podcast in particular. We don't really have a lot of structure to this. We just kind of rap with people. But if you wouldn't mind, like, just introduce yourself. Like, what do you do? Your business?
Sure. So my name's Nicole Bailey Rice. I'm a certified registered nurse anesthetist, as well as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. I just recently completed a board term for the nonprofit, the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, Practitioners, and Psychoanalysts. And I own and operate Boise Ketamine Clinic, and I've been doing that for the past 7 years.
7 years?
Yeah.
I just went to lunch yesterday with a friend, and we both were curious. Are you the one that you were on Eagle before this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. It was the first ketamine clinic in Idaho, and among the first in the nation. When I opened up, I found like 10 other clinics that had an online presence, so there were not many. And for perspective, now there's probably over 400 clinics and more opening all the time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I actually just had a friend post some stuff like, hey, is anything working out there? Like, can somebody give me some like advice? She lives in Arizona, and I just like looked up to see if there was any in like her area, because I know where she's at. And there was like 3 right around her place in Arizona. Yeah.
Wow.
And said 3 clinics. That's crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Nicole, how did you get your start? How did you find or discover this?
You know, it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll sum it up briefly. Yeah. So I lost someone to suicide in my early 20s, somebody that I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. And that was pretty traumatic. And I was kind of at this crossroads where I was looking to go back to school. And I was torn between going back and becoming a psych NP or becoming a CRNA. And, you know, eventually I did both. But initially I went to anesthesia school. And about a year into practice, I came across a continuing education article that was talking about the use of ketamine in an ER setting for suicidality. And the data on that was just incredible. It was showing a 70% remission with a single dose of ketamine.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's saving patients inpatient stays. People were stable enough to go home. So it was a pretty big deal. And I thought, you know, if there's any way that I could do that and save other families, other people from going through that kind of experience, it's probably worth pursuing. So I had a lot of conversations with the DEA, with the Board of Nursing. I called and talked to a lot of people because it was pretty new. There weren't a lot of people doing it. And after talking to all of those folks, you know, I got the go-ahead to go ahead and open. They were really just concerned, was ketamine like within my scope, right? And it is, because it's an anesthetic. So I had a lot of training on ketamine in anesthesia school. So They said, yeah, go ahead and open. If there's data on it, you know, do what you're going to do. And I was like, can I get that in writing? And, and I'm just going to go ahead and give this a go. And at the time when I opened, there was really only a handful of protocols that were even in use. The main one was the National Institutes of Mental Health protocol, which is where you got this series of 6 at around 0.5 milligram per kilogram over a few weeks. That's the protocol that was in use all over. So, and now there's a variety of protocols. So.
Wow. And this was what year?
This was in 2016.
That's the year I started Rooftops.
Yeah,
and in
nice.
Boise?
Yeah, yep, and that was in Boise.
Wow.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I wish I would have gotten into it earlier. Like, I wish I would have, because I've been your guys' fucking friend forever. And, you know, I honestly, I don't think that I ever asked, you know? So I guess that's bad on me, you know?
I actually called in 2017 when you guys were in Eagle. Yep.
Yeah.
But it was just, for me at least, you know, when I got the price, like, oh my gosh, I could buy a pound of it and just do it in my house, you know? So I just didn't do it. And then in 2020, January of 2020, I did it. And after, because I've been doing psychedelics for therapeutic and for, I would say, spiritual purposes since 2006. Mm-hmm. So I've been to Peru in 2008 and brewed ayahuasca with shamans. Like, I've done San Pedro ceremonies with shamans. Like, when I discovered psychedelics, like, it completely changed my life. And so I've worked with all these medicines for years. And then in, you know, 2020, oh my gosh, like, this was a whole nother ball game. And then, you know, seeing you in, I think, April of this year, like, my whole life is completely changed. Completely. In fact, going with a friend to lunch yesterday, he's a big fan of ayahuasca. And I told him, I really have no desire to do any other psychedelic.
Correct.
Because nothing is as powerful and effective for releasing energy, you know, especially traumatic energy as this.
Yes.
So to me, it's like, it's the most advanced, the most evolved psychedelic.
We call it a factory reset. You know?
For sure.
And it really is. That really is actually what your brain is doing.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. You're quieting the default mode network, which is the reality processor of your brain. So that's what's keeping you present. That's what creates your construct of reality. And so what ketamine done is it quiet that piece. And whatever comes up for you in your session is what's going on in the background. You're accessing a gamma state that's what you would run into if you had about 10,000 hours of meditation practice.
Whoa.
So it's a very like restful, restorative state that you can access. We're just doing it in a chemically mediated way rather than you have to go through years of practice.
But even those years of practice, when you get to that 10,000 hours, aren't you still releasing those same chemicals?
Absolutely.
So to me, it's like why would you, maybe our ancestors, because they didn't have access to the technology that we have now to create this medicine, yeah, they had to do 10,000 hours, but it's 2022. Like, why would you? I'm not driving a horse and buggy.
Right.
So yeah, it's just incredible stuff.
When they just found it somewhere, right? And they just found out it's natural. It
is naturally
occurring.
Yeah,
what's up with that?
So this was kind of rocked my world a few years ago because we've always thought that ketamine was a synthetic, right? We thought we discovered it. We thought it was totally synthetic, that it was man-made. Well, it's not. We actually found it on mushrooms in 2020, this really obscure like Parasites and Vectors journal, which studies like cattle. They came out and are like, oh, surprise, we found this on mushrooms. And the cattle eat it and it's anti-parasitical and it does serve a purpose in nature. So it is something that does grow on mushrooms in nature. So we just discovered it. We discovered it naturally a little after we had discovered it synthetically.
Which is kind of the opposite of how we discover things. That is wild.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Going back to what you were saying about, it, I don't know if it was disrupting or changing like our normal waking state, but like for me, especially the last one I did, like these places I go, these dimensions I go to, they're just as real and if not more profound than even this reality. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think these are states that feel familiar to us for a reason. I mean, I think these are things that are going on in the background noise, but we don't often have the ability to access them, right? They're typically things that you either have to train to access or you have to chemically induce them to access. Children, before their default mode network is hardwired, like those little suckers are running around like hallucinating and seeing stuff. Like they have very vivid imaginations. Their reality is just forming. But adults, you get kind of hardwired into what your reality is and the construct, and you miss a lot of these other things that you may have once had access to. So that's why there's a noetic or a familiarity type of feeling in that space. Is it's probably something our brains have done for us in the past, and it's probably something that we have accessed before.
Wow. So do you think they're real?
Do I think the space is real?
Yeah.
Or like the insights you're getting out of the space is
Both.
real? I think real is subjective to the person that's experiencing it, right?
Well, then that makes me think, how do we know this is real?
Right, we don't. Like, how do we know we're not in a simulation right now? We
Right,
don't.
right.
One thing that I like to think about is my first time doing it. Or no, not my first time doing it. It was probably my third one. I like literally went to the future and was like talking to future Ken, future Gary. And I remember I was like panicking, like breathing really hard. And they're like, "You think that's air you're breathing?" Like just like on the Matrix. And I was like, "Oh shit." But it was weird too because, and we've talked about this on past episodes, like I was like praying. I was like, "Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior." Because I was like kind of wigging. And yeah, it was so weird because they could hear my thoughts, you know, so it wasn't like I was talking to them like we're talking now. It was like telepathically talking to them. They could hear everything and I could hear everything. So we talked about this in the past, like how could you lie to somebody if they can hear your thoughts, you know?
Right.
You can't fucking lie to anybody, you know?
Right.
It's weird to think about.
Yeah, it's so weird. What in your experience, what condition would you say it's most beneficial for?
For ketamine, I see it work for trauma about 90% of the time, and that's pretty big. So trauma is a leading global disability, PTSD, depression. It works for all of those things, but it's very rare that someone comes in and does a series with us and doesn't get some movement in that metric. So when people come in, we are screening. We use a handful of some clinically validated screening tools. And with the PTSD metric in particular, we're looking for about a 15-point drop in the PCL-5. And we get that almost every person that comes in.
Really?
Yeah, has some movement in trauma. So really, really helpful for that.
Wow. Yeah, that was very interesting for me because, you know, before doing session 1, you know, taking the evaluation, and I completely forgot about it by session 6. And then I take it again, and then you tell me I'm just like, oh my God, like, because the test or the evaluation is set up in such a way, like, I have no idea, like, what the question, the purpose, what it's testing for, no idea. I'm just answering them, and then you're telling me, like, oh, you dropped depression or anxiety or whatever. I'm like, oh my God, like, all right, that's awesome. Because it did, like, since then, I mean, I'm almost 6 months, I haven't drank at all. I completely quit cannabis within the last 40 days. Like, my whole life has completely shifted since starting this therapy.
It's a big deal. This is a really gentle but powerful medication, and it can really change some lives.
Yeah. And as cool as it is, because for me, the experience in and of itself is just so absolutely incredible. Like, there's not really this, like, strong desire to, like, do it all the time.
It's not a medication that really works that way. You know, a question I get a lot is there potential for addiction? And there's potential for addiction with any medication, but ketamine is a Schedule 3N, which means it doesn't cause physiological addiction. So you're not going to crave it. You're not going to go into withdrawals from using it. And it's not something that, you know, most people tend to have a problem with. It just doesn't create that quality in people.
Wow. Gosh, just another incredible aspect of it.
One thing that I know is it's been a while, probably like 4 months since my last session, and I haven't really felt like I needed one, but someone else I was talking to recently, she said like, okay, I'm ready to go in again, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, of anybody that has changed, she's changed the most. Like, just cause I, live with her and I'm dating her. And, it's so fucking crazy how like, dude, she used to have like 3 nights a week. She was crying and like, I mean, just a 180. Cause I don't see that ever. It to me, like that alone was huge. But then, seeing obviously Gary take it and my significant other, I went in and I mean the changes from me, I feel like I'm a completely fucking different person, like just life has been a lot better, and I didn't really test high on like anxiety or depression, but trauma, because I didn't really I don't ever like, a lot of people bring up their childhood a lot, but like I never really brought mine up that much, and so I don't really, I never, because I hear some people, because I obviously watch a lot of like podcasts and stuff on ketamine, and a lot of people say they like relive situations. I didn't relive shit, but like I went like mine were very like step one, I went to like this little place. It was like almost like being in a bouncy house type place, and then from speaking to the like future me, basically he said that was like a in between place of like going to the future, but like each time I got further and further into it, and then like I think it was my 3rd or 4th time I saw like the beings, but they were like weird, and then the 4th and 5th time like it was clear as day who they were, it was so weird. But he's like, oh yeah, your mind just like can't jump straight into it. It has to like accept each level,
You do kind of build on prior sessions. So I've had a lot of patients over the years tell me, oh, I feel like I'm on the cusp of an insight. And then when they come back, they can kind of access that again. So each session has its own unique quality, but I do feel like they kind of have a cumulative effect.
Wow.
Yeah, because session 6 for me, in fact, that was the one I asked you to stay with me for a minute. It felt like a commencement, like a graduation. Like it was like, okay, you made it. This is session 6. And it was the wildest experience. I mean, except for last one, the IV was, oh my gosh. But yeah, to your point, is each one was, it was another level. It's almost like the way I've been thinking about it recently is that first you have to kind of clear out the traumatic energy that you've stored over a lifetime.
Yep.
Because that's almost like a filter that blocks, consciousness or ideas or whatever from coming in. But once you've got to a certain level, like again for me, when I go in, my intention is I'm trying to travel interdimensionally. Like I want to see like what's going on. Like you were saying, to me, it's like changing the radio station or the TV station. Like I'm not in this reality anymore. I'm in a completely different reality. And it's just, oh my gosh, incredible.
Yeah, as real as day. It's like feeling, like I remember feeling the table and like feeling the drapes, and I was just like astonished, like, holy crap, like this is so real,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, we chatted a little bit last time on my last session, because you just gotten back from that retreat or
from the microdose conference.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you learned and what's most exciting about that.
So this was pretty cool. So this is a conference. It was Wonderland that was just held the first part of November in Miami. And they have people from all over the globe really who are working with psychedelic medicines come and present. It's kind of an interesting conference. You have a lot of panels where you have some people working with this that are giving opinions, and then you have some data that's presented, and then you of course have some big pharma companies that are funding some research. But what was great about this conference was Rick Doblin was there, who's the founder of MAPS, who's working to legalize and push MDMA through the FDA for federal approval and prescriptive use. And he released his data. It's pretty promising data. They are in phase 3B, which is the last phase of FDA trials before a medication's cleared to hit the market. And they anticipate that first prescriptions in the US are going to be in first quarter of 2024 or maybe second quarter 2024. So it's coming.
Wow, just pharmaceutical grade MDMA for therapeutic use.
Yep.
Wow.
Now, that's also going to be created, right? Like, that's not something that is natural or...
MDMA is synthetic. Yep. So that's going to be created. And it's a very unique protocol. And these drugs, MDMA and very likely psilocybin as well. Psilocybin's a little further behind in the research than MDMA is. But most of these drugs are looking like they're going to be released with a REMS protocol, which means risk evaluation mitigation strategy. And that's something that FDA does if they have some concerns or they want to track this drug a little closer. So there's a lot of drugs that come with a REMS protocol, and it just means you have to meet other requirements to administer that drug, to store it, to prescribe it. You have to jump through some other hoops. And typically, the patients that participate with a REMS drug, you're keeping a national database of their results and what goes on. And this is really, I think, an effort in harm reduction, because we want to make sure, as these medications roll out, that first and foremost, we're not causing harm to people.
What kind of harm are they afraid of?
I think with these, they've been Schedule 1 for so long. So I think most of it is probably like cultural perception that these drugs are harmful. I don't think that there's not a whole lot of big looming risks, but they are drugs that can potentially, bring up some trauma for people, especially if you're in a longer state. Like, these sessions are 6 to 10 hours for some folks. That's a long time to be in an altered state. So some of the things that they've talked about are having therapy teams that are too deep, right? A male and female therapist team, because you are direct one-on-one in a room with a patient for quite a long time, and they are in a non-ordinary state. So just in order to keep that patient safe, having a couple layers of protection, that's one big concern that's come up. Therapeutic touch is also something that gets talked about a lot, just like establishing boundaries before the session. Like, is it okay to hold your hand and comfort you, or would you prefer no touch at all, right? Yeah. So that's a big conversation that's happening in psychedelic medicine. And then there's some theoretical concerns, like the classic psychedelics, so like MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, those are all serotonin mediated.
Right.
So those all work on serotonin. Ketamine's unique in that it doesn't touch serotonin, really. It's more dopamine and glutamate, and you have some other MAOIs, but serotonin's pretty weak. So that makes ketamine really user-friendly for people who are on psychiatric medications, antipsychotics, and that's where you have the theoretical risk with these other classic psychedelics, because they do affect serotonin, and a lot of folks are on antidepressants, antipsychotics that are serotonin mediated. You could run into serotonin syndrome, right? So that's a theoretical risk, and that can be a pretty lethal complication. We aren't really seeing that so far, and they're starting the last phase of their research. They're starting to trial some patients that are currently on those types of medications to see if it is safe for them to do both at the same time. But where you would create a risk when doing that is if you're going to use a classic psychedelic like MDMA or LSD or psilocybin that is serotonin mediated, and someone is coming typically for a mental health indication, they're very likely on a daily medication, right? So the risk you run is if you have to bring them off of those substances for 4 to 6 weeks to let the serotonin clear their system, you have somebody who has serious mental health issues who you've now just removed the thing that's helping them for 4 to 6 weeks. So that's a potentially really risky period in getting people prepared for this. So that's where ketamine may step in and provide a therapeutic bridge to keep people safe while they're waiting to trial something else.
Because it's not
serotonin.
Oh,
so there's a lot of uses. So you could keep someone safe and keep their depression, mental health issues treated for that time frame while they're waiting for that all to clear so they can utilize another substance.
Wow.
But we don't really know how that's all going to play out. That's just some of the theories that people are talking about.
But a great strategy.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, because that is, someone that's been dependent on, SSRIs or antidepressants for so long, when you take them off, the adverse effects, oh my gosh.
It can be a really potentially dangerous time frame for folks. And so that's why I think you're going to see these drugs released with a REMS protocol, just to keep people safe and make sure that there's standardization across the industry, because you don't want a lot of different practitioners doing a lot of different things.
Of course.
You want a protocol, you want something that people have guidelines in which to practice, just to make sure you're meeting some standards and keeping folks safe, because these are pretty transformative experiences and you're putting people into some pretty vulnerable states, and you want to make sure that if you're going to bring up trauma in an altered state, that you have people that are clinically trained, that can help people work with that can help people process that, and just keep people safe throughout the whole experience.
What are some of the limitations, or going back to psychiatric medicines? What are some things that are going to prohibit someone from doing ketamine? Let me give you an example. My son's mother, I've told her, and she really wants to do it, but she just had a baby, breastfeeding, things like that. Also on some psychiatric meds. So what are some things that would prevent someone from being able to?
Ketamine's pretty safe for almost everybody that wants to try it. We do have to talk a little bit more if anyone's ever had a heart attack, stroke, seizure, currently has out of control high blood pressure. Nobody that's pregnant, unless it's a real dire need and I'm collaborating with an OBGYN, which has never happened. That would be the only, scenario where I would treat somebody that's pregnant. But most of the time, most people can use ketamine. It doesn't really interact with a lot of the psychiatric medications. Lamotrigine, there's a handful that you may need, a little bit more ketamine to get to a dissociative state. Anti-anxiety drugs like Xanax, alprazolam, Klonopin, all of those you may need a little more ketamine to get somebody what they need. Same with lamotrigine. Those can be weak blockers of ketamine's effects because they're on that same receptor system.
Interesting.
One thing that I know is because, I brought it up to certain people, right? And they always hit me with the, oh, you mean that horse tranquilizer?
Right.
And so one thing that I and I just looked it up, right? If you're in an ambulance, you're probably getting ketamine.
Yes.
And then probably what I think is the coolest guy on the planet, Brett Favre, because you can't go, or if you're in the NFL, if you miss or if you go under anesthesia for surgery, right, you can't play for 3 weeks. So he was fucking doing ketamine, or well, it wasn't doing it, but all of his surgeries in football were he just did ketamine and never went under, so he could keep continuing to play football and never miss a game. So
I can give you some history on ketamine.
No.
It's really kind of a
please.
Fascinating history.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So ketamine was developed by Calvin Stevens, who was commissioned by Park Davis. That's a big pharma company.
Right.
The 1960s, they were doing some really wild stuff. They were looking for some new anesthetics. They were putting people to sleep with PCP.
Whoa.
And PCP actually is a great anesthetic. It's cardiovascularly stable. It doesn't cause respiratory depression, except people hallucinate for days, right? So that was what they were running into. They're like, this is great intra-op, but post-op people are tripping balls for days.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure something else out.
Yeah.
So he took PCP, looked at it, changed a bunch of things around, right? So he came up with a bunch of analogs, so things that are just slightly modified from PCP. And ketamine was the 351st analog that he came up with. And it's very, very stable because it has a very short half-life. It also doesn't create respiratory depression. It's also cardiovascularly stable, and it's cleared out of your system pretty quick. And it's one of the only anesthetics that has amnestic qualities, analgesia qualities, which are pain relieving properties, and anesthesia, which is really the 3 tenets of a good anesthetic. So it really is one of the best anesthesia drugs that we have. The person from Calvin Stevens, the person that started researching it for human use, was Edward Domino. And he started using it in a prison population, putting people under. In that case, they were doing really well. Domino actually took it home. The 1960s were really wild, and this was really common. People would just take what they're studying home and they would try it.
Try this out.
He took it home, and he and his wife utilized ketamine together. And they were talking about their experience later, and his wife said, well, that was dissociative. And that's where the term, it's actually on the label, dissociative anesthetic, came from, was from Edward Domino's wife, who had tried it recreationally at home. So that's kind of the history. So it was definitely in people first. But the thing that makes ketamine unique as far as an anesthesia agent is it doesn't depress respiratory rate. So veterinary medicine went nuts when they found out that there was an anesthetic that didn't depress respiratory rate, because no one wants to intubate a horse. They have incredibly long necks. They're very hard to intubate. It's very hard to work on those animals if you need to control their airway.
Right.
And so that's why ketamine really took off in veterinary medicine. But it's always been an anesthetic for people. It's on World Health Organization's top 10 essential medication lists because it lends itself really well to not only emergency medicine, but like developing nations. So if you can utilize ketamine as a battlefield anesthetic, you can utilize it, like medics carry it in the Army, EMTs have it in ambulances. It's pretty user friendly because it has a very wide therapeutic index, which means you can give quite a lot of ketamine and not cause people harm. So it's just incredibly safe, and that's why it's got such wide use.
I actually just finished up a Huberman podcast today, and he referred to it as PCP. So it's an analog.
It's an analog.
PCP.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Gosh.
The name ketamine just comes from the two groups it's made of, which is a ketone group and an amine. That's all it is, ketamine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. So tell us about, are you allowed to talk about your experience, like when you first did it?
Yeah, so I completed a training program through Integrative Psychiatry Institute that was a year-long program for people that want to do ketamine-assisted therapy. And I did that. I audited the course for them because I was on the ASKP board. And so I was like, that's great. It's free. I can audit it and learn a little. So I did that course, took about a year. The culmination of that training was an experiential out in Boulder. So they do intramuscular ketamine, and the highest that they'll do there for that experience, just because they're facilitating so many students at once, is 0.75 milligrams per kilogram. So I think for me that was like 50 milligrams of and they do intramuscular ketamine there. So that was a good experience. It was a nice program to do. I think I got a lot out of it. It was just interesting to see the amount of people that were coming through this clinic doing this. Like that's 30, 40 people is a lot to facilitate in a weekend.
Yeah. Like you were saying, is like being in a group setting where you were saying like someone was doing their first session just explaining it all.
Yes.
And you got someone that's trying to relax with them next to them. Yeah, that'd be really difficult.
Yeah, that's why, at my practice, I'm pretty passionate about private rooms. A lot of places will like line people up in recliners, or they'll have people in a big open setting all together. Wow. That doesn't really facilitate a lot of privacy. And then if one person starts to have a difficult experience, pretty much everybody around them is going to start to have a difficult experience. So that's why we've gone with, private rooms and everything pretty quiet and separate for folks.
I tell everybody about that because the room, setting is the most important. So having the setting, it's so comforting, so nurturing, the beds or the futons and the projections on the oh my God, it's just like going home, it's so awesome. Like I wish, in fact, I intend if I ever die like that, I'm gonna choose. And I'm like, oh yeah, let's set this up and be in a nice bed, weighted blanket. All right, see you later, fam. Gone, because it's the best part. Is that because that allows you to feel comfortable. And that's a big part of. You're going into such a wildly altered state, and especially if you're going there for the treatment of trauma, like you want to feel comfortable enough to experience that and to let it go.
Well, it sounds like some of those places sound like magic foot spas,
Yes.
Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Go hit a magic foot spa and get fucking ketamine.
That doesn't not sound good.
No, it does not.
Yeah.
Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah, gosh. And something else when we were talking, you shared with me that you just got back from that conference was I think that as this becomes more and more mainstream, because my mom, like I talked to my mom last week, because she always tell your dad, because she really wants to do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, listen, you're a grown-up. Why you need permission, Just go do it. But she finally, last week, she said, if you'll go with me, I'll do it. I was like, oh my God, I'd be honored to go with you and do it, It's just so incredible. But again, as this becomes more mainstream, like it's going to put a lot of therapists out of business.
Yeah, I mean, there's a theory that that's going to happen, right? I mean, people are getting better, and they're getting better quickly, and they're getting better in a more longer term way. Now, ketamine is something that people maintain on average once a month, but a lot of these initial data sets coming out of the MDMA and psilocybin trials, they have some people that they've been following for a couple of years and they're still in remission. That's pretty powerful. If you can have people that are still in remission, 1, 2, 3 years post-treatment, that's a game changer.
Oh, yeah. But also, then it makes me think, because I haven't had therapist assisted session or anything like that, but I could actually, they do provide to be there and to actually use that skill set to help someone that is going through a perhaps traumatic time. Yeah, that is very valuable.
Yes, they're really great. We have a clinical psychologist and a life coach that work with us, and they guide sessions. We've facilitated a couple of couples sessions, so we've done a variety of ketamine assisted therapy and ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So I think these clinicians are really good at what they do.
Wow. Yes, and I would think that even more so, that's someone that they really do want to help versus someone that's just showing up for 5 appointments a day, talking about the same trauma that they've been talking about for years,
Yeah, they do. I mean, ketamine quiets that fight or flight that your amygdala is responsible for, that typically gets activated when you're revisiting trauma. It quiets that part of your brain, so you're able to access these topics in a way that feels a lot safer. Ketamine creates almost a chemical buffer between the person and that experience, so they're really able to process this. So for a lot of people that have come up against walls in therapy and aren't quite getting where they want to get, it can help bring those walls down and help them access and work with some things.
One thing I've noticed from just living in this world that we live in, right, is that everyone, it almost seems like psychologists, they just are like, hey, let's try this. Hey, let's try this. There's a lot of guessing that goes into, oh, let's tone this one back and give you this one, right? And I hear this a lot. And I'm just like, go do ketamine. I don't understand. So I think that it might actually help a ton of people too when this becomes mainstream, because instead of guessing on a bunch of different pills or oh, this one made you sick, try this one, they can just say, hey, let's try ketamine, or hey, let's try some MDMA.
Yeah. And
then you don't have to be, on something every single day that might make you feel sick, or man, I got to tell you, just being around certain people, you notice that sorry, my doctor took me off these pills and is now trying Adderall, or, oh, now I'm trying this, and they get sick in the morning, or they don't want to go to work. It's man, we could just skip all of these problems and just jump straight to, hey, let's fix what's going on here.
Find the root cause.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For some people, those medications are life-changing and they're going to be on them forever. But there is a rule of thirds in the psychiatric prescription world. Oral medications are going to work for a third of people that take them. A third are going to have side effects that are so intolerable they quit, and a third are going to be non-responders. So that's 2/3 of people who try oral antidepressants, antipsychotics, that they don't work for. That's a pretty big gap in who we're able to help. Ketamine, by contrast, has about a 70 to 80% response in almost everyone who tries it. So, I mean, there are some non-responders. You have the, risk that you may be in the 10 to 20% that don't respond, but that's higher than almost any antidepressant, antipsychotic. It's really high success rate.
Yeah, I remember talking to one gal in the lobby or whatnot, and she was telling me that she didn't experience anything, and I was kind of blown away by that. But now hearing that 20% number, that's interesting. I wonder, and I don't know if you can give this information, is that more, is there like a certain age group that maybe experiences that more, or is it?
Yep. So anybody over 65, and the more decades of mental health history you have, the harder it is to get a response, right?
Gotcha.
And that's just, you have a lot of damage and aging and oxidative stress. You have all of that going on for many, many decades. So for those folks, that's the conversation I have with them. If you're over 65, you may need a late response course, which is a little more than the traditional series of 6. For those folks, they may need 10.
Yeah.
And there's a higher chance that they may not respond.
That also
Yeah.
makes me think of
Yeah.
the Matrix, where he says typically we don't pull people out of the Matrix at a certain age. I apologize, Neo, because that makes sense. Like if your reality is one way for such a long time, maybe it's like your spirit or ego, that just is like, I'm not fucking letting go, this is me, fuck, that's crazy.
I actually, on that point, is I know someone that is pretty severe manic, and they're on like lithium and have been for decades.
Yep.
So what do you
So ketamine and mania, you wouldn't infuse somebody who's currently manic. You do want to keep anybody who experiences mania on a mood stabilizer. They can also use ketamine. Typically, mania is involved with like bipolar 1 diagnosis, right?
Right.
So those folks tend to experience depressive phases much more than they experience manic phases. And the depressive phase is what's pretty debilitating, because that can last quite a bit longer than bouts of mania. So ketamine's great for the depressive phase. It's not going to do a whole lot with mania. It's not going to prevent mania from happening. There's some theoretical risk that ketamine could induce mania. We haven't really seen that a whole lot clinically, but because of that risk, you're not going to take somebody who's in an altered state already and further alter that state,
Wow.
right? So anybody who's manic, you're going to just reschedule them, wait until that is passed. And then you do some education around, certain conditions.
So you're saying like you wouldn't administer it while they're in a manic, or while they're manic, but when they are depressive, that would be the time to administer it.
It would, yep.
It would help with the depression, but not so much with the mania.
Right, that's correct. Yep,
Wow.
you need a mood stabilizer for mania for sure. Yep.
Oh, so they'll stay on that, but it will help them with when they become depressed.
Yes, correct.
Wow, that's an interesting. Wow.
I remember when I was selling vehicles, I worked with a guy.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're okay.
I thought I silenced those.
You're all right. I worked with a guy whose cousin did meth like a couple times and thought he saw Jesus Christ, right? And like was taking medication because like he like tried to kill his kids or some shit like that. Would this bring somebody back from something along those, or like would they try ketamine on somebody like that? Because I know he was like in and out of like a psychiatric hospital and like had a lot of issues from
Like schizophrenia then.
Yeah, so ketamine, if you already have psychosis, you're probably not going to infuse in that person, especially if they're in a psychotic break or they're acutely ill. You're probably not going to use ketamine for that person because you don't want to, you're already altering a state. You want to start from a relatively normal or depressed state. You don't want to start from an already altered state and add on top of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so wild.
Yeah, what do you think's the future?
I think the future is what Rick Doblin presented at the conference, which was this picture of this beautiful clinic, and on all of it, it said, MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, ketamine on the windows, right? Like a full-fledged psychedelic clinic where you have clinicians that are trained and skilled and can talk with patients and say, this medicine might be the right fit for you, right? But you have the legal, therapeutic, guided option to utilize all of these different medicines. And I think we're going to see that happen in the next 10 to 15 years, if not sooner.
Wow. I mean, when I started in 2006 just eating mushrooms at my house, no way did I ever imagine what you just described. But it is just so incredible because so many people's lives can be changed just by just going and taking a nap. For a couple hours.
What blows my mind is, I'm a second generation American, Norwegian and Danish, right? And my grandfather's side of the family, we can trace that back all the way to the first king of all of England, which is pretty far back. And I mean, they were eating a shit ton of mushrooms back then, right?
Oh, for sure.
Like eating a ton.
Yeah.
And it's just so weird to me that like people have been doing this for so long, but like now all of a sudden, it's just so weird how did it not start out being tested? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
how.
Well, that's a good point, because we were actually doing a lot of research with a lot of these medicines in the 1960s, right? The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous used LSD to become sober, right? So there was a lot of research being done, and high quality, really good research. Like Santos was issuing LSD basically to any therapist that wanted to work with it. They were shipping it out. It was a really crazy time, but people were getting better and the research was pretty positive. But then you had the war on drugs, right? So you had what happened. Timothy Leary came out, and he was really pushing, tune in, drop out, right, turn on. And so there was this big cultural thing. We were also going to war. And so Nixon became worried, well, people are not going to want to fight, right?
If they're happy.
If they're happy, people are not going to want to fight. So, and I don't know that was a real, big concern. But regardless, the war on drugs kind of started at that point. A lot of funding for a lot of these medications was pulled. And then eventually there was a stop. And then they rescheduled a lot of these. These drugs were unscheduled when people were using them in this way. They didn't have a schedule, so you could have them, you could use them. Now they're Schedule 1, right? So now they come with criminal penalties if you're using them illegally. And so that's the difference, is they went from being something that wasn't scheduled to a Schedule 1, and then we pulled all the research. So now you're just seeing a renaissance of this research pick back up. What are we, 70 years later, right? We just lost 70 years of research, but the data actually is there.
Oh, yeah.
One thing that I know, and it's going to get brought up because I have a lot of Christian friends and I myself am Christian. But one thing I like to just say, because I'm sure a few of them will listen to this, is, I talk to quite a few people and I bring up the ketamine whenever they're having issues. And one feedback that I always get is like, oh, well, I don't think God would want me to do this, right? But I'm like, motherfucker, you're on Adderall. You take painkillers whenever it gets prescribed to you, right? Like, so what is the difference, I think that as soon as like doctors start prescribing it, there is going to be no difference, right? And I don't know where that line gets drawn, but I like if a doctor tried to prescribe me meth, like I wouldn't do it. But it's the same thing. Like when I played rugby forever, and in high school, I got a collapsed lung, a spontaneous pneumothorax, which a lot of people, remember. And I was in the hospital for a month and a half, and they just pumped me full of Demerol and morphine. And then one day they were like, okay, we don't think we need you, or you need to be on this anymore. And the worst pain I've ever been in my entire life. It wasn't them cramming a tube through my rib cage. It wasn't breaking bones. It wasn't collapsing my lung. It was the withdrawals I had from Demerol and morphine. I was shaking, convulsing, like I felt horrible. And so every injury I've ever had, MCL tear, I have missed a tendon in my foot. Every shoulder injury I've had, doctors are always like, hey, you want these Norcos? Hey, you want these Percocets? Hey, you want this Vicodin? Right? Or, hey, you want these Oxys? And I have turned down painkillers every single time. And I did something that was illegal and just smoked cannabis, and it tended to make everything okay. But it blows my mind that I still have friends that like they'll take these or they'll take Xanax or they'll take whatever, but they, just jump so far away from anything that is natural or anything that, you know what I mean, is something along these range. Is there anything that you guys talked about as far as that goes in the conference, or is it just...
So ketamine is a prescription medication. When people are coming to the clinic, I'm writing them a script for what they're getting. So they just don't go home with anything because it's administered at the clinic. So that's still regulated and tracked through the DEA and done under my licensure and training, right? So it is a prescription medication when people are coming in. The difference really is container, right? A therapeutic space and just knowing and having the clinical guidance of what kind of dose you need, right? What kind of routes that's the best fit for you. Like
Yeah.
having that information separates it from illicit use. And when you're talking about like opiates versus ketamine, they're different, classes. Opiates are Schedule 2, right? So those are drugs that are known to be highly addicting, right? A lot of potentially dangerous things. One of ketamine's main uses right now, at least in an intraoperative setting, is its role in opiate-sparing anesthetics.
Whoa, wow.
So that means you're supplementing an anesthetic with some ketamine and typically some Precedex and sometimes some lidocaine, and you're decreasing narcotic use for 30 plus days post-operatively just by adding a couple of medications during their operation.
Wow.
So it's really great, I think, in battling the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
Another use for ketamine is actually helping people in early stages of sobriety. So you have a lot of inpatient drug rehabilitation places that are now giving patients, 1 to 2 sessions of ketamine, and then when they're graduating their programs, they're sending them back home and they're having them complete their series with a local ketamine clinic.
Gotcha.
So it's really helping people in that early sobriety period.
Yeah, because I've heard that withdrawals from alcoholism is one of the worst withdrawals. So yeah, to have a safe, mediator, especially for that first period of sobriety. Yeah, wow, that is incredible.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Gosh, it was something I was thinking about, but it totally left my mind.
I know that you guys have wasn't there another building? Because there was a while I was dropping off hop tea somewhere else too.
Oh yeah. So we were off of Eagle and then we were off of Americana.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember that too. So they used to sell some of my hop tea.
At the clinic?
Yeah.
Oh wow, nice.
We just gave it to people.
Oh really?
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. It was good.
It was pretty good. Really good. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, it was really good. And it was from local hops, so.
Do you guys have a website, social media, anything like that?
Yeah, we do. We can be found under Boise Ketamine Clinic, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and that's our website as well. It's just boiseketamineclinic.com.
Where would you say that the majority of the clients are coming in from?
We're the referral system for all of St. Luke's, so we get a lot of referrals from St. Luke's. We've been getting a lot from actually teenage referrals from the St. Luke's Neurobehavioral Health. So we have a lot of people that refer to us, and then we have a lot of people that are just online looking for something themselves. But I would say mostly referrals is what we get through the clinic. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I know I tell everybody about it. In fact, that's the purpose of this, is to get it out there, wake people up.
I'm going to send this to my mom, my girlfriend's mom. I'm sending this to, because, I mean, there is a lot of people that, for some reason, they live and die by this FDA approval, right?
Yeah.
And, that was the first thing my mom said, like, are you sure you want to do that? It's not FDA approved.
Oh, I can speak to that and tell you why that is, because this helps clear up some of the misconception.
Yeah.
So ketamine was first administered to people in 1964, right? So pretty early on.
Yeah.
When a drug is first under patent, the people that are developing it have a financial incentive to add more uses to that drug's label, right? So they want to add whatever they can to that label during the time that they hold a patent on it. Well, patents expire, and typically a big pharma kind of patent will be anywhere from 7 to 20 years, depending on what kind of patent they obtain. Well, ketamine has been generic then since 1984, so generic for a really long time. We didn't know that this was a use that could even go on that label till it had long been generic. Once a medication's generic, there's no financial incentive for anybody to study an old drug for a new use because they can't make any more money off of it. So ketamine is a drug that's FDA approved, but all that's on its label is anesthesia, right? Even though we use ketamine for pain all the time. So 20% of medications that are prescribed in the US are off-label uses. So just because something is not FDA indicated for a certain condition certainly doesn't mean that we don't use it for other things. Like beta blockers in heart failure is another really good example of an off-label use of a medication that occurs all the time in medicine. So there just wasn't anybody to fund these high dollar studies because there's no new big pharma money to be made. But the bulk of the research is there. We've been using this medicine for 70 years now, and there's very few negative long-term sequelae coming out of it. And we've been using ketamine in this way, microdose sessions for people now over 10 years in this country, and other countries have 20 plus years of data to show.
Wow.
So it's not like it's no longer like a wild west, or
Right.
you're really
Yeah.
being a cowboy if you're doing
Or you-
something like
yeah.
this, right? There's definitely data supporting this kind of use.
Right.
Yeah, the
That's
research is there. It's just the little word on the label is not.
What's up with the? I think last one I picked up a friend there. I talked about the nose spray or the tranches, and she said, "Oh, that's been."
Yeah, so the amount that you absorb varies by the route of administration. So nasal spray, there is a medication that was released called Spravato, and this is just ketamine split in half. So ketamine's racemic, meaning it has a right side and a left side, and it's kind of a mirror molecule. What Spravato is they took just the left enantiomer of the molecule, split it, isolated it, made a nasal spray. So the results with Spravato, the initial data that came out of that, people were required to start a new SSRI, and then they were part of a REMS protocol, right, that delineates how often they get it, how many milligrams. The milligrams with Spravato was 56 or 84. And the amount that you can absorb nasally is 20 to 40%. So if you're taking even 84 milligrams and you absorb the max out of that, you're getting, maybe 20 milligrams.
Yeah.
And then this in-clinic stay was about 2 hours, and the compensation codes associated with that when it rolled out was kind of a nightmare. So a lot of people weren't working with Spravato. So that's the medication that is like half ketamine that is approved for use. The reason they were able to get a new patent on that is because they split it, and it was
Right.
unique enough to grant a new patent. But the data on it is not, from their own research, it was 25% effective when someone started a new SSRI. And if you look at the data done by Murrow initially on racemic IV ketamine, which is the full molecule ketamine, that's what most ketamine clinics use, the data on that was 70%, right? So almost triple the efficacy with a racemic IV cheap ketamine, right?
Wow. Why? I guess what was the purpose in splitting it?
Creating a new drug, right?
That's it?
Creating a new drug and having something that they can then make some more money off of this drug, right?
I
And
see.
Spravato for the folks that it works for, that's great,
Sure.
right? For the 25% of folks that this really does help and it's covered by their insurance, wonderful. But for a lot of people, that's not going to be the fit. For a lot of people with, especially if you feel that there's value in that dissociative state, it can be very hard to achieve a dissociative state with a nasal and oral route. It's possible, but your body just doesn't absorb as much. IV is definitely clinically the easiest and most consistent route to work with. That's direct in your vein. You're getting every molecule of that ketamine. So you're going to absorb that at a very reliable rate. And I can gauge almost down to the minute when you're going to start your session, how long it's going to be, when you're going to come out. That's a very user-friendly psychedelic experience, right? If you can plan something almost down to the minute, that's super user-friendly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's why IV lends itself to the most research, and it's the easiest studied. Intermuscular is also a pretty good route, but the absorption is variable with intermuscular.
Wow.
So you can have some people that feel like sometimes they have a really light session and sometimes they feel like it hit them very heavy, and that can be at the exact same amount that you're giving through a muscle. It just depends how your body absorbs it, but with a vein you remove a lot of those variables.
So it varies even with the same person.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
even
So
with
one
the same
session,
person.
same dosage, hot, deep. Next one, nothing.
Absolutely.
Whoa.
Yeah, you can have, especially with different routes, right? IV is the most consistent route of
Right.
administration. Everything else is, the next most consistent would be intermuscular, followed by nasal and oral, right? So it just depends which route you're working with. But IV is certainly the one that has the most predictability. And the most customizability, right? During sessions, I can add medication. I can stop a session. I can rescue someone if they needed to. I can give them Versed, which is a short-acting benzodiazepine. So you have a lot. You have like an out.
Oh,
and you can
really?
also go deeper
Yeah.
with an IV route of administration. Now, most people don't ever need an out, right? The Versed expires in my safe. I waste it. I order new stuff. So I don't,
wow.
I don't tend to need it often because I think we do a pretty good job of preparing people for their experience, and also doing a gradual dose escalating protocol as they come through. So they work their way gently and slowly through different experiences. I don't take somebody who's psychedelic naive and have them go through ego dissolution and rebirth the very first time I meet them, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, they're not coming back, chances are.
Right.
So would you say that most people start with intramuscular?
No, most people start with IV.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We've offered intramuscular. We haven't done intramuscular all that long. We've offered it within clinic maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years. Because there was really as a way to make it more accessible, right? Because it's less supplies, they're shorter sessions. And I wanted to have something that when I'm talking to so many people and they're like, we really want to do it, but IV is more expensive, right? That's not accessible to a lot of folks. So I wanted to find something that was accessible to the majority of people that needed it, and that also worked a little bit. So there was some data that came out from the Clarasana chain of clinics, and they started using intramuscular ketamine with a lot of their veterans, and they were showing pretty comparable results, not quite as stellar as the IV group, but pretty comparable. So that data was strong enough for me to offer an intramuscular series. And we do track, outcomes for all of our patients, and I do think that we've had pretty similar outcomes with our intramuscular group.
Yeah, they were quite similar. But
just knowing people, and I thought about this when you were talking about it with the nose spray and the lozenger. A lot of people, I feel like problems. A lot of people are lazy as far as like taking care of it, and I feel like if that 20%, if you see that number, right, I feel like there's a lot of people that would take that and then go, oh well, I already tried ketamine and it didn't work, so
yes.
Is that why you guys cut that from the?
So we still offer it. We don't offer Spravato just because it's a lot of hoops to jump through. It's a lot of dealing with insurance and prior authorizations, and the compensation on it isn't great. So when I can offer the same thing or very close to the same thing in racemic ketamine for cheaper, I have continued to offer it. We just don't see it utilized often. People don't tend to pick that route, and if they do that route, most of them convert to intramuscular or IV at some point, because it's just a lot more effective. Yeah.
In what cases would you see people choose like the lozenge over an injection?
So most people are choosing it based on cost, right? And we do have some therapists that work with lozenges within the clinic, and we do have some people, our psychologist and the life coach hold lozenge group once a month, and so they'll do some group work. They get a limited use script. I clear them medically, they clear them psychologically, and we come up with a group and we run that once a month. And that's nice for people to get, a gentle introduction to ketamine. It's not these deep, crazy experiences. It's a little bit more surface level, and it lends itself nicely to group. So we've done a lot. We've done like an all females group. We've done a trauma survivors group. We've done a first responder group. And so there's a lot of different ways to work with ketamine. But definitely the one that has the bulk of the research is IV for sure. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Those groups. Oh my gosh.
Well, it brings me to another question, because I'm thinking that I know some police officers, that this could help out a lot. Is there anything, because I know that one of them, I brought up to him like, hey man, you should try this, and he was saying that like he would have to jump through all these hoops and like it would be a big ordeal.
No. So ketamine is a prescription. So the ordeal is I write them a script, right? Okay. That's it.
Yeah.
Same as anybody going anywhere. Yeah.
Going to a doctor or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There is no. Okay.
No.
And could it be different per union, you think, or like there was nothing that you know of?
There's no contraindications that I know of. I mean, we've had people that have come from a variety of professions, right? We've treated all sorts of folks, and it's a prescription medication. If anything were to come up, as long as they have the diagnosis, which I can confirm because I'm a psych NP, and they have an indication and it's safe for them, it's a prescription medication. And there's not really anybody that can tell them you can't pursue this option, right? Ketamine's also something that isn't standardly tested for on a drug screen. So you'd have to, not even on an 11 panel is ketamine something that's commonly tested for.
Gotcha.
It's a specialized test. But regardless of that, if someone were to be in a program where they needed, urine drug screens, I just write a script. We collaborate with those folks. I write a note and I say, this patient's presented from this date to this date. They're going to have ketamine in their system. This is a prescription medication.
Wow.
Yeah. So as long as they're adhering to the discharge instructions, which really are, please don't work or drive for 12 hours post ketamine. That's how long it takes for it to clear your system entirely. It's safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they might have to like take that, if they have like 2 days off in a row or something, they might have to take that like the first day. And scheduling those 6 appointments might be more difficult.
Yes.
Okay, I understand that because they typically work like 2 or longer, weirder shifts, right?
Yes, we have a lot of folks that do like 5 days work, 2 days off, right? And they come their first of their 2 days off, and then they come again when their schedule lines up.
Huh. And then I guess this could help too, because I know a lot that are on like night shifts, so they're typically asleep during the day or something. Do you foresee like ever being like a 24-hour clinic or?
I don't know. I mean, if the need were there, maybe. Yeah. Right now we run from about 10 to 8 Monday through Saturday.
Wow.
So we do have a lot of flexible hours, like after work hours for folks, and some weekends as well.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That is awesome. Gosh dang it. I love it. I want to do it today. Well, gosh, thanks so much for your time and coming to talk to us and educate us about it. Gosh, it's so exciting in the time that we live in, so many people waking up and, really dealing with their traumas and stuff like that to become better people. So, gosh, thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for
really
having me.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm just glad I'm your friend.
Yeah.
For sure.
Me
Gosh,
too.
dang it. Yeah.
Nice.
Thanks so much.